Part 1. The Sacrifice of Shame. The cold metal floor of Station Omega 7 hummed beneath Jake's bare feet as he crawled through the ventilation shaft. His knees were bruised from weeks of sneaking through these tight spaces, but he didn't care. Tonight was different. Tonight, they were going to kill her. He'd heard the guards talking about it 3 days ago while scrubbing floors in the command center. The dragon. The last one. The creature that had refused to break for 300 years. Tomorrow at dawn, they'd turn on the molecular disintegrators and erase her from existence like she was nothing more than a mistake that needed correcting. Jake pressed his face against the grate and looked down into the containment chamber. There she was. Ember. That's what he'd started calling her in his head, though the council just referred to her as Subject-47. She was massive, easily the size of a transport ship, with scales so black they seemed to absorb the light around them. 20 thick gravity restraints pinned her body to the reinforced floor, each one humming with enough power to crush a battle tank. But it was her eyes that always got to him. Amber-colored, bright as stars, and filled with something Jake recognized all too well. Defiance. The same look he'd seen in his own reflection every time the orphanage director told him he was worthless, that humans were barely better than animals in this galaxy full of advanced species. Down in the observation deck, Commander Maria Torres stood with her arms crossed, staring at the dragon through the transparent barrier. She was Valerian, one of the so-called superior species, tall and elegant with skin that shimmered faintly blue under the lights. Jake had seen her around the station before. Unlike most of the other aliens, she didn't look at humans like they were insects. But she still wore that uniform. She still followed orders. The chamber doors slid open with a hiss, and the Grand Council representatives filed in like they were attending some kind of ceremony. There were 7 of them, each one draped in flowing robes that probably cost more than Jake would see in 10 lifetimes. They moved slowly, deliberately, their multiple eyes and sensory organs all focused on the dragon with a mixture of fear and satisfaction. The one in front, Chancellor Roberts, raised his primary hand. His voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by the station's speakers. Subject 447 has proven incompatible with all bonding protocols across 17 different species. The creature has caused the deaths of 43 trained handlers and destroyed property valued at over 6 million credits. The Council has ruled that continued containment poses an unacceptable risk. Termination will proceed at dawn. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Termination. Like she was some broken machine. He'd been watching Ember for weeks now, and he'd seen things the Council clearly hadn't bothered to notice. Like how she always turned her head away when the younger guards walked past, even though she could have easily grabbed them with her tail. Or how last week, when a maintenance drone had malfunctioned and fallen near her restraints, she'd used the tip of her wing to gently push it back toward the safety zone instead of crushing it. That wasn't the behavior of a mindless killing machine. That was someone who was careful. Someone who had control. Someone who chose when to fight and when to show mercy. The Council members began their inspection, walking around the dragon's restrained form like she was already dead. One of them, Ambassador Wilson from the Beastmaster species, kept shaking his head. His kind were supposed to be the best at taming exotic creatures, and Ember had broken 5 of their top handlers. Jake could practically feel the wounded pride radiating off the alien. Perhaps if we had access to human neural scans, we could understand why traditional bonding methods fail, Wilson was saying to the others. Though I doubt such primitive creatures could offer much insight. Primitive. Jake had heard that word his entire life. Humans were primitive. Backwards. Lucky to even be allowed in Council space. His mother had died believing it, worked to death on a colony transport because human labor was cheap and human lives were cheaper. Something hot and angry flared in Jake's chest. He looked back at Ember, and for just a second, her amber eyes shifted upward. Toward him. Could she see him through the grate? Did she know someone was watching who didn't see a monster? The countdown clock on the wall began its activation sequence. 12 hours until execution. The Council members filed out, their ceremonial duty completed. Commander Torres lingered for a moment, her expression troubled, before she too turned and left. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of the gravity restraints and the slow, steady sound of Ember's breathing. Jake made his decision right there in that ventilation shaft. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have weapons or authority or anything that mattered in this galaxy. But he had 12 hours, and he'd be damned if he let them kill her without at least trying something. He started crawling toward the maintenance access panel. His heart hammered in his chest, and his hands shook, but he kept moving. The worst they could do was execute him too. And honestly, dying while trying to do something right seemed better than living the way the galaxy wanted him to, small and quiet and grateful for scraps. As he reached the access panel, Ember's head shifted slightly against her restraints. Those amber eyes tracked his movement through the shadows above. And Jake could have sworn he saw something flicker there. Not hope exactly. But maybe curiosity. Maybe recognition. Maybe the first spark of something the galaxy hadn't seen in 300 years. Jake's hands were still shaking when he dropped from the ventilation shaft into the containment chamber. The fall was further than he'd expected, and he hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact like he'd learned during his brief stint in the station's cargo bay. The alarms started screaming immediately, red lights flooding the chamber like blood. He didn't have time to be scared. The security team would be here in less than 2 minutes. Ember's massive head swung toward him, and for the first time, Jake was standing on the same level as her. She was even bigger down here, her scales reflecting the alarm lights in strange patterns that seemed to shift and move. Her jaws could swallow him whole without even trying. One swing of her tail could turn him into paste on the wall. But Jake had grown up in places where being afraid meant you'd already lost. The orphanages, the work camps, the stations where humans were treated like talking rats. Fear was just another tool people used to control you, and he was done being controlled. So instead of running, he started singing. It was the only thing he could think of. The old lullaby his mom used to hum when the transport ships would shake during atmospheric entry. She'd died when he was 6, but he still remembered every word. His voice came out rough and cracking, barely audible over the alarms, but he kept going. Stars above and stars below, guide us where we need to go. Through the dark and through the light, keep us safe throughout the night. Ember went completely still. The growling that had been building in her chest died away. Her pupils, which had been narrow slits of fury, suddenly dilated wide. Jake took a step forward, his legs feeling like they might give out any second. "I know you're not a monster," he said, his voice steadier now. "I know they hurt you. I know you're scared. Me too." He held out his hand, palm up. It was such a human gesture, meaningless to most alien species, but something in him knew it was right. His fingers were trembling, but he kept his hand extended. The chamber doors exploded open. Commander Torres burst through with a full security team, weapons raised and charging. "Stand down," she shouted, though Jake wasn't sure if she was talking to him or to Ember. But neither of them moved. Jake's eyes locked with Ember's, and something happened that he couldn't explain. It felt like falling and flying at the same time. His mind opened up, and suddenly he wasn't just Jake anymore. He was also Ember, and she was him, and they were both seeing each other's memories in rapid-fire flashes. He saw her as a hatchling, playing in crystal caves on a world with 3 moons. Saw her family, dozens of dragons soaring through violet skies. Saw the council ships arriving, saw the weapons fire, saw her mother's body falling from the sky. Saw herself trapped, barely old enough to understand what had happened, dragged into a lab where they poked and prodded and tried to break her mind into something useful. 300 years of torture dressed up as science. 300 years of handlers who saw her as property, who used neural whips and compliance collars, who punished her every time she showed the slightest hint of independent thought. They hadn't wanted to tame her. They'd wanted to erase her and replace her with a weapon that looked like a dragon. And through their connection, Ember saw Jake's life too. The orphanage where human kids were given numbers instead of names. The work camps where 12-year-olds operated dangerous machinery for 16-hour shifts. The casual cruelty of alien overseers who truly believed humans were too primitive to feel pain the same way. The night his mother died, coughing blood in a transport bay while the medical staff refused to waste supplies on just a human. 2 survivors. 2 beings that the galaxy had tried to break. Recognizing each other across the impossible distance of species and form. Ember lowered her head slowly, carefully, until her forehead touched Jake's outstretched palm. The moment they made physical contact, something exploded outward from both of them. The gravity restraints shrieked and sparked, cracks spreading through the reinforced metal like spider webs. Energy rippled through the chamber in visible waves, and Jake felt power flood through him that he'd never imagined possible. He could suddenly sense everything. The electromagnetic fields running through the station's walls. The thermal signatures of every person in the facility, their body heat painting pictures in his mind. The mathematical precision of orbital mechanics, understanding instinctively how the station maintained its position. And deeper than that, he could feel Ember's vast consciousness settling beside his own, not controlling him, but present. Like having a friend standing next to you in a dark room. Commander Torres lowered her weapon slowly, her eyes wide. "Impossible," she whispered. "Humans don't have the neural architecture for bonding. Every test we've run." Your tests were designed for domination, Jake said, and his voice sounded different now. Deeper. More confident. You were trying to force bonds. Humans can't do that. We can only offer them. The security team backed up nervously as Ember stood to her full height, the gravity restraints falling away like paper. But the dragon didn't attack. She stayed exactly where she was, her wing extending slightly to shelter Jake beneath it. Within minutes, emergency broadcasts were racing across the quantum communication network. By the time Grand Chancellor Roberts materialized via quantum gate in the observation deck, half the council had already seen the sensor readings. His face cycled through several colors that Jake's translated chip interpreted as shock, disbelief, and fear. This changes nothing, Roberts said, but his voice lacked conviction. The creature is still dangerous. The bond must be severed and studied. You mean you want to dissect us to figure out how we did what you couldn't? Jake interrupted. Through Ember, he could sense Roberts's emotions, the mixture of scientific curiosity and territorial pride. You're afraid because if humans can bond with beings you couldn't control, it means you were wrong. About us. About them. About everything. Ambassador Wilson pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. This boy is clearly using some kind of technology. The Beast Masters have spent millennia perfecting bonding techniques. A primitive human couldn't possibly. Ember's growl cut him off. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through every surface in the chamber, making the observation glass crack. The message was clear enough that even the translated chips understood it. Touch Jake, and find out exactly why they'd called her untamable for 300 years. Commander Torres made a choice in that moment that would define everything that came after. She stepped between the council representatives and Jake, her weapon lowered but her stance protective. The execution order is void, she said firmly. We have a successful bond. Council protocols require a minimum observation period of 30 days before any decisions regarding bonded pairs. I'm invoking that protocol now. You would defy the council for a human? Wilson spat the last word like it was poisonous. Torres met his gaze without flinching. I'm following regulations. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the Oversight Committee. The standoff lasted 17 hours. Jake stayed in that chamber with Ember, neither of them sleeping, both of them waiting to see if the galaxy would accept what they'd done or try to destroy them for it. Through their bond, Ember shared 3 centuries of patience, and Jake shared 14 years of stubborn human determination not to quit. Outside the station, news was spreading faster than the council could contain it. Human colonies that had been silent and submissive for generations suddenly had something they'd never had before. Hope. And questions. Lots of questions about why they'd been told for so long that they were inferior when one orphan boy had just done something 17 advanced species had failed at. The galaxy was about to learn something important. Humans might be weak. They might be primitive. They might lack the technology and biology of the so-called advanced species. But they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. That real strength didn't come from breaking someone's will. It came from standing beside them as equals. And that terrified the council more than any dragon ever could. 3 weeks after the bond, Jake stood on soil he never thought he'd see. Ember's homeworld. Or what was left of it. The planet looked like a graveyard. Shattered crystal formations jutted from the ground like broken bones, and the sky had a strange purple tint that Ember's memories told him used to be bright violet. The council had strip-mined half the planet after killing her people, looking for the same crystals that had given the dragons their power. They'd left it hollow and dead. But Jake had insisted on this location for the demonstration. If the council wanted to study the bond, they'd do it here. On ground they'd stolen. In front of the entire galaxy. Behind him, 17 massive transport ships were landing, each one carrying what the galaxy called failed experiments. Creatures that had killed their handlers. Beings too dangerous to control but too valuable to execute. The council had agreed to bring them here, though Jake suspected they were hoping for a disaster. Nothing would make their lives easier than watching the human boy get torn apart by the monsters he claimed to understand. Commander Torres stood beside him, her hand resting on her sidearm out of habit. She'd been reassigned after defying the council, demoted from commander to glorified babysitter. But she'd volunteered for it anyway. Jake still wasn't sure why. You know this is insane, right? She said, watching the first cargo door open. Half these creatures haven't been in the same room without killing each other. You're talking about 17 different species, all of them traumatized, all of them violent. Jake felt Ember's presence in his mind, calm and steady. Through their bond, he could sense what she was feeling. Sadness for her world. Anger at what had been done. but also something else. Hope. The kind that came from surviving the impossible. They're not violent because they want to be, Jake said. They're violent because that's the only language anyone's spoken to them. The first creature emerged from its transport, and even Torres took a step back. It looked like living crystal, its body made of sharp, jagged edges that glowed with internal light. Council records called it Subject-23, a being from Sigma-9 that had killed 12 researchers when they tried to extract samples from its body. They'd kept it in isolation for 60 years. Jake walked toward it slowly, hands visible, making no sudden movements. Through Ember's senses, he could feel the creature's energy signature, the way it pulsed with fear disguised as aggression. It had been hurt so many times that it attacked anything that came close, just trying to protect itself. "Hey there," Jake said softly. "I know you're scared. I know they hurt you. But look around. No cages here. No labs. Just open space." The crystal being shifted, its edges rotating in a way that might have been confusion. Through Ember, Jake could sense it scanning the area, searching for the trap. Because there was always a trap. But there wasn't one this time. From another transport, a phase-shifting creature emerged that looked like smoke given form. It had been labeled impossible to contain, after it killed its handlers and escaped 3 times. The council had finally caught it using banned neural suppressors that caused permanent damage. Now it moved slowly, painfully, its form flickering like a broken hologram. Jake felt his chest tighten with anger. These weren't monsters. They were victims. More creatures emerged. A being that looked like a small storm cloud, crackling with electricity. Something that resembled a giant mantis made of living metal. A creature that existed partially in another dimension, its body appearing and disappearing. Each one had a file full of deaths and destruction. Each one had been scheduled for execution before Jake's bond with Ember had changed everything. And slowly, carefully, Jake let them meet each other. The crystal being approached the phase shifter cautiously. Without handlers shouting commands, without scientists taking readings, without guards ready to activate pain compliance devices, they simply existed in the same space. The phase shifter's form flickered near the crystal being's surface, and Jake realized they were communicating somehow. 2 creatures that experienced reality in completely different ways, finding common ground. Ember moved among them like a mountain coming to life. She was easily the largest being present, and when she spread her wings, her shadow covered half the gathered creatures. But she didn't dominate. She didn't threaten. She just was. Present. Solid. Another survivor welcoming them to the club nobody wanted to join. The storm cloud being drifted toward her, and Jake felt a spike of fear from Torres. That thing had destroyed an entire research station. But Ember lowered her head, and the electrical being settled near her, its crackling energy calming to a gentle hum. Through the bond, Jake understood. The storm being had been trapped in a container too small for it, slowly going mad from the confinement. Ember understood captivity. They didn't need words to recognize each other's pain. By the end of the first hour, something impossible was happening. The dangerous creatures were interacting peacefully. Not perfectly, not without tension, but without violence. Jake moved among them, and through Ember's expanded senses, he could read their emotional states. When 2 beings got too close and fear spiked, he gently redirected them. When curiosity overcame fear, he facilitated introductions. It was exhausting. His head pounded from processing so much information, and his legs shook from the effort of staying standing. But he couldn't stop. This was too important. Then the second wave arrived. Humans. They came in small ships, rust buckets that barely qualified as spaceworthy. Orphans from the mining colonies. Refugees from labor stations. People who'd heard whispers through networks the council didn't monitor. Jake recognized the look in their eyes because he'd seen it in mirrors his whole life. The look of people who'd been told they were worthless so many times they'd almost started to believe it. A young woman named Beth was the first to approach. She'd lost her entire family when a mining tunnel collapsed, and the company had blamed it on human error rather than admit their safety equipment was faulty. She stood in front of a creature that communicated through vibrations in the ground, something that looked like a cross between a lizard and an earthquake. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said, her voice shaking. "Neither did I," Jake admitted. "Just try to feel what it's feeling. Don't push. Don't force. Just be open." Beth closed her eyes, and Jake watched through Ember's senses as something tentative formed between her and the creature. Both of them understood loss that shook them to their foundations. Both of them had survived when the world tried to bury them. The bond that formed was fragile, barely there, but it was real. More humans stepped forward. A mechanic named Cole who'd lost his arm in a workplace accident connected with the mechanical mantis being. Both of them were damaged, both of them had been told they were broken, and both of them were still here anyway. An elderly woman named Rita who'd outlived 3 generations on a colony ship found herself drawn to an ancient creature that moved so slowly it seemed frozen in time. Not every connection worked. Some humans couldn't open themselves up enough. Some creatures were too damaged, their trust too far gone. But enough bonds formed that even the skeptical council observers couldn't deny what they were seeing. Ambassador Wilson descended from his observation platform, his face an unreadable mixture of emotions. He approached Jake as the twin suns began to set over the ruins of Ember's world, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. "How?" he asked simply. Jake looked at Ember, feeling her pride and love through their bond. "Your people see bonding as taming. As taking something wild and making it useful. But these beings aren't wild animals. They're people who were hurt. And humans recognize that because most of us have been there too." "You're saying the key is shared trauma?" Wilson seemed disturbed. "No," Jake said firmly. "The key is recognizing they are people. Not weapons. Not research subjects. Not property. Just people who deserve the choice to say yes or no. Your species never gave them that choice. You tried to force them into boxes they didn't fit. And when they fought back, you labeled them dangerous instead of asking why they were fighting." Wilson was quiet for a long moment, watching a human teenager laugh as a floating jellyfish-like creature performed what might have been the alien equivalent of tricks. "We thought we were helping. Forming bonds to protect both species." "You can't protect someone by breaking them first," Jake said. "That's just called control." As darkness fell over the ruined planet, Jake counted 43 new bonds. 43 connections between humans and beings the galaxy had given up on. It wasn't perfect. Some were strong, some were barely there. But every single one was chosen. Commander Torres found him sitting against Ember's side, exhausted and barely conscious. "You did it," she said softly. "You actually did it." Jake smiled, his eyes already closing. "We did it. All of us." Through the bond, Ember's contentment washed over him like a warm blanket. For the first time in 300 years, she wasn't alone. And neither was he. The galaxy was watching. And for better or worse, everything was about to change. The galaxy didn't change overnight. But it cracked. And through those cracks, light started getting in. 3 months after the demonstration on Ember's world, Jake found himself in a council chamber he never thought he'd see the inside of. Not as a janitor or a servant, but sitting at an actual table. Ember couldn't fit through the doors, so she waited outside, her massive form curled around the building like a living fortress. Through their bond, Jake could feel her amusement at making the council members nervous. Commander Torres sat beside him, though she wore a different uniform now. Ambassador Torres. The Valerian Empire had promoted her rather than face the shame of having one of their officers prepare to destroy what became the galaxy's most important discovery. Politics was funny that way. Across the table sat representatives from 40 different species, and every single one of them looked uncomfortable. Some were angry. Some were curious. A few looked terrified. But they all had one thing in common. They needed humans now, and they hated it. Chancellor Roberts cleared his throat, his skin shifting through several shades of blue that Jake's translated chip said meant embarrassment. "The Council has reviewed the data from the bonding demonstration. We've also received reports from the medical teams examining the newly bonded pairs. The results are, frankly, unprecedented." "You mean we succeeded where you failed?" Jake said flatly. Torres shot him a warning look, but he ignored it. He was done being polite to people who'd spent his whole life treating humans like garbage. Roberts's skin flushed darker. "Yes. The bonding success rate among human participants exceeded 90%, compared to less than 5% among other species over the past millennium. We need to understand how this is possible." "You want to study us," Jake said. "It wasn't a question." "We want to learn from you," interjected Ambassador Wilson. The old beast master looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 months. His entire species had built their reputation on taming exotic creatures, and humans had just done it better using methods he'd never considered. "My people have been bonding with creatures for thousands of years. We thought we understood the process. Clearly, we were wrong." Jake felt Ember's curiosity through their bond. She was listening to everything through his ears, experiencing the political dance of species trying to admit fault without actually saying the words. Through their connection, he felt her suggest a response, not in words but in feelings and concepts. "You weren't completely wrong," Jake said, softening his tone slightly. You understood that bonds were possible. You just approached them backwards. You tried to dominate first and build trust later. Humans do it the other way around. A representative from the Krell species leaned forward. She was young for her kind, barely a century old, with scales that shimmered green and gold. But why? What makes human neurology so different? We've studied your brain scans. You're not telepathic. You don't have advanced mental capabilities. By every measurable standard, you should be the worst species for bonding, not the best. Jake thought about how to explain it. Through Ember, he could feel her memories of the first time council scientists had tried to bond her with a handler. They'd used neural interfaces, drugs, punishment, and reward. Everything except the one thing that mattered. It's not about brain power, he said finally. It's about empathy. Humans spent most of our history being weak. We couldn't fly, couldn't breathe underwater, couldn't survive in extreme temperatures. We were prey animals who got lucky and developed big brains. But that meant we had to cooperate to survive. We had to understand each other's feelings, read each other's intentions, work together even when it was hard. Species like yours evolved as predators or developed technology early. You never needed to develop that same level of social bonding. You're saying we lack empathy? The Krell representative sounded offended. I'm saying you have empathy for your own kind, Jake corrected. But when you look at other species, especially ones you consider primitive, you see tools or threats. Not equals. Humans bond with anything. We make friends with robots, name our ships, cry over fictional characters. We're wired to form emotional connections, even when it doesn't make logical sense. That's our survival mechanism. Torres nodded, adding, the military bonding programs failed because they were based on dominance hierarchies. Alpha and Beta, master and servant. But the creatures you were trying to bond with were sentient beings with their own wills. They didn't want masters. They wanted partners. Humans understood that instinctively because our entire evolutionary history is based on partnership, not domination. The chamber fell silent. Jake could see the representatives processing this, and through Ember's enhanced senses, he could read their emotional states. Some were accepting it. Others were fighting against it, their pride refusing to admit that the primitive humans had a fundamental advantage in something so important. Then the doors burst open, and everything changed. A security officer ran in, breathless, holding a data pad. Sirs, we have a situation. The Valerian Empire has mobilized its fleet. They are demanding custody of all bonded humans and creatures for, quote, protective research purposes. Torres stood up so fast a chair fell over. That's insane. The Empire signed the non-interference agreement 3 weeks ago. Apparently, the military division doesn't agree with the diplomatic one, the officer said. They've issued an ultimatum. Surrender the bonded pairs within 48 hours, or they'll enforce economic sanctions on all human colonies. They're also threatening to seize control of key human settlements. Jake felt ice run through his veins. Through the bond, Ember's rage blazed like a supernova, hot enough that he had to actively calm her down. Around the galaxy, he knew, other bonded pairs were feeling the same thing. 43 humans and their partners, all connected by something the Valerian Empire wanted to dissect and weaponize. They're going to kill us, Jake said quietly. Study us, figure out how bonding works, then dispose of us and create their own bonded weapons programs. Probably use cloned humans they can control. Chancellor Roberts looked genuinely distressed, his skin cycling through colors Jake had never seen before. The Council cannot allow this. The bonded pairs are under our protection. The Council couldn't stop them from stripping Ember's world, Jake shot back. What makes you think you can stop them now? The Valerian Empire has the biggest military in the galaxy. You'll talk and debate while they just take what they want. Torres was already on her communication device, pulling up tactical displays. The Empire has 60 warships moving into position around the primary human colonies. They're not bluffing. If we don't comply, millions of humans will starve within weeks. Jake stood up, his mind racing. Through Ember, he could feel the other bonded pairs across the galaxy, their fear and anger creating a network of emotion. Beth and her earthquake creature. Cole and the mechanical being. Rita and her ancient partner. All of them connected, all of them threatened. An idea formed. Crazy. Dangerous. Probably impossible. But humans specialized in impossible, didn't they? We're not hiding, Jake said. And we're not surrendering. We're going to show the Valerian Empire, and everyone else watching, exactly what bonded pairs can do when they work together. Torres stared at him. Jake, you're talking about 43 people and their partners against the most powerful military in the galaxy. That's not brave. That's suicide. Jake smiled, feeling Ember's fierce agreement through their bond. Outside the building, he heard her roar, a sound that shook the windows and made every council member flinch. Through their connection, he felt something else too. The other bonded pairs, answering her call. 3 months ago, everyone said bonding a human with a dragon was impossible, Jake said. Let's go show them what else they're wrong about. The galaxy had spent centuries building a system based on strength and domination. They'd forgotten that sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe wasn't force. It was 43 people who refused to give up, and the beings who chose to stand beside them. The Valyrian Empire was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The Valyrian warships hung in space like dark clouds around Colony 7, the largest human settlement in the sector. Inside the lead vessel, Admiral Crane watched his tactical display with satisfaction. 40,000 humans lived on that colony, most of them working in the agricultural domes that fed a dozen nearby stations. Cut off their supplies for 2 weeks, and they'd be begging to comply. He'd given the ultimatum 36 hours ago. 12 hours remained. What the Admiral didn't know was that Jake and the other bonded pairs weren't on Colony 7. They were scattered across 17 different locations, connected through something the Valyrian Empire didn't understand and couldn't detect. The Bond Network. Jake stood on an asteroid mining platform with Ember coiled beside him, her scales absorbing the starlight. Through their connection, he could feel Beth 3 systems away, sense Cole's nervous energy on an orbital station, feel Rita's calm determination on a transport ship. 43 minds linked through their partners, sharing information faster than any communication network. Everyone ready? Jake asked, not out loud but through the bond. The response came back in waves of determination, fear, and stubborn human refusal to quit. Torres stood nearby, coordinating with the few council members who'd chosen to help them. This is insane, she muttered, checking her tactical display for the 100th time. You're planning to disable 60 warships using 43 people and creatures the galaxy considers dangerous. The math doesn't work, Jake. The math never works for humans, Jake said with a slight smile. That's kind of our thing. Through Ember, he reached out to the other dragons. There were 7 of them now, eggs that had been preserved in stasis for centuries, hatched and bonded with humans who understood loss. They were young, barely larger than shuttlecraft, but they carried the same fire their ancestors had. And they were very, very angry about what had happened to their world. The plan was simple, which meant it was probably crazy. But sometimes crazy was all you had. Now, Jake said. Across 17 locations, the bonded pairs moved as one. Beth and her earthquake creature targeted the Valyrian supply depot on Station Theta. The creature didn't attack violently. It just touched the station's hull and vibrated at a specific frequency. The metal didn't crack or shatter. It simply stopped being able to hold a magnetic seal. Within minutes, supply containers were drifting into space, and the station's crew was too busy retrieving critical materials to support the blockade. Cole and the mechanical being interfaced with the Valyrian communication network. The being existed partially as digital consciousness, something the Empire's firewalls weren't designed to handle. They didn't destroy anything. They just rerouted every military communication through a 4 to 7 minute delay. Suddenly, warships couldn't coordinate, couldn't respond to commands, couldn't function as a unified fleet. Rita and her time-displaced partner did something nobody fully understood, not even Jake. They moved through space in ways that physics said were impossible, appearing near 3 different warships simultaneously. They didn't attack. They just existed in a way that made the ship's sensors go haywire, reading the same vessel in multiple locations, creating ghost contacts that sent the fleet into confused defensive patterns. And Ember, with Jake holding on for dear life, led the young dragons in a coordinated strike that Admiral Crane would later describe as impossible, terrifying, and disgustingly effective. Dragons didn't need ships. They were ships. Ember's species had evolved to survive in vacuum, to navigate through space using electromagnetic fields, to communicate across vast distances through methods that human science couldn't quite explain. They were living spacecraft, and they'd been doing this for millions of years before the Valyrian Empire even existed. They hit the warship formation from 7 different vectors simultaneously. Not with weapons. With electromagnetic pulses that Ember had spent 3 centuries learning to control. The pulses didn't destroy the ship's systems. They just overloaded them temporarily, forcing emergency shutdowns that would take hours to reset. Admiral Crane watched in horror as his flagship systems went dark. Through the viewport, he saw a massive black dragon glide past, a human boy visible on her back, both of them silhouetted against the distant sun. The boy waved. The Admiral had commanded fleets for 40 years. He'd fought in 3 major wars. He'd never been defeated by a teenager and a dragon before. It was embarrassing in a way that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Within 3 hours, the Valyrian blockade was chaos. Ships drifting with dead systems. Supply lines disrupted. Communications scrambled. And through it all, not a single shot had been fired. Not one person killed. The bonded pairs had disabled the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy without violence. Because humans had learned something that the advanced species had forgotten. The best way to win a fight was to make fighting impossible. The council convened an emergency session. Jake stood before them again, this time not as a supplicant but as someone they couldn't ignore. Ember waited outside, but every council member could feel her presence. They'd all seen what she and the others could do. Chancellor Roberts spoke first, his voice heavy with resignation and something that might have been respect. The Valyrian Empire has withdrawn its ultimatum. They are requesting negotiations regarding the bonded pairs. Not negotiations, Jake said firmly. Recognition. The bonded pairs aren't weapons or resources. We're people. Partners. And we're done being treated like property. Ambassador Wilson stood, and Jake noticed the old beast master looked different somehow. Humbler. The council moves to officially recognize human bonded pairs as autonomous entities under galactic law. We further move to disband all military bonding programs and establish ethical guidelines for future bonding research, with humans serving as primary consultants. The vote was unanimous. It had to be. The alternative was admitting that 43 humans and their partners had more power than the entire council, and nobody wanted to say that out loud. But the real changes happened in the months that followed. The Valyrian Empire issued a formal apology for the genocide on Ember's world. Not because they wanted to, but because the galactic community demanded it. Reparations were paid. Restoration efforts began. The ruins where Jake had held the first demonstration started sprouting human settlements alongside Dragon Ares. Other species came seeking bonds, but they came differently now. Not as masters looking for servants, but as individuals looking for partners. Some succeeded. Many failed, learning that the ability to bond was less about biology and more about being willing to see another being as an equal. Human colonies that had been starving suddenly received resources. Not as charity, but as payment. Humans became the galaxy's most valued mediators, facilitators, and counselors. Species that had been in conflict for centuries requested human negotiators. Dangerous creatures scheduled for execution were placed in human care instead. Jake watched it all from the rebuilt peaks of Ember's homeworld. The planet was healing slowly, the crystal formations beginning to regenerate. Human engineers worked alongside dragons to restore what had been destroyed, both species learning from each other. Young dragons soared overhead while human children played in the valleys below. Beth had started a school teaching other humans about bonding. Cole was designing new technologies that combined human creativity with alien capabilities. Rita had become something of a legend, the oldest bonded human, proof that you were never too old to change. Torres found Jake one evening as the twin suns set. She'd resigned from her position as ambassador, choosing instead to help coordinate the growing network of bonded pairs. You know the history books are going to call you the boy who changed the galaxy, right? Jake laughed. They'll probably get it wrong. Make it sound like I had a plan or something. Didn't you? I just didn't want them to kill her, Jake said, reaching up to touch Ember's side. Through their bond, he felt her contentment, her joy at seeing her world heal, her amazement that after 300 years of captivity, she was finally free. Everything else just kind of happened. Torres smiled. That's the most human thing I've ever heard. Across the galaxy, more bonds were forming. Not all of them would work. Some would fail. Some would end in tragedy. But they would all be chosen. Nobody would be forced. Nobody would be broken and remade into a weapon. The galaxy had spent millennia believing that strength came from domination. That the way to gain power was to take it, to control it, to bend others to your will. They'd built empires on that belief, conquered worlds, subdued species. And it had taken one orphan boy and an untamable dragon to show them something different. Real strength didn't come from breaking others. It came from standing beside them. From offering partnership instead of demanding submission. From recognizing that the being in front of you, no matter how different, how strange, how alien, was a person who deserved respect. Ember stretched her wings, the movement causing wind that rustled Jake's hair. Through their bond, he felt her question. Was he happy? Was this what he'd wanted? Jake thought about the orphanage where he'd grown up. The stations where humans were treated like talking animals. The galaxy that had told him his entire life that he was worthless, primitive, insignificant. And then he thought about the 43 bonds that had formed. The hundreds more that were forming every month. The slow, steady change rippling across civilization as species relearned what partnership meant. Yeah, he said softly, both to Ember and to himself. This is pretty good. Above them, stars filled the sky. The same stars humans had looked up at for thousands of years, dreaming of what was out there. They'd made it to space and found a galaxy that didn't want them. Found species that considered them primitive. Found a system designed to keep them small. But humans had survived worse. And with partners who chose to stand beside them, they'd shown the galaxy something it desperately needed to see. That sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. That strength shared is stronger than strength taken. And that an untamable dragon and an insignificant boy could do something incredible when they refused to accept the galaxy's version of impossible. The bond between them pulsed with warmth and certainty. Two survivors who'd found each other across the vastness of space and species. Who'd changed everything just by refusing to give up. The galaxy would never be the same. And honestly, that was exactly what it needed.